Inside the Cage on bjpenn.com is back. 2 episodes this week, and we go right into the women's flyweight division once again. I just told her off air. So I said it off air. I got to say it on air so I don't look like I'm brown-nosing too much. And if I'm going to brown-nose, I got to do it publicly. Roxy fighter, Roxanne Modafferi, one of the interviews I've been so stoked and trying to pursue for quite some time. She is here, right here on Inside the Cage with myself, Mike Pendleton. Roxanne, how are you?
I'm awesome. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Now, you're coming off a huge win against Macy Barber, and, you know, we could talk underdog and all that, and I'm not really here for that. But it was definitely a huge win for you, and you'll turn around and you'll face Lauren Murphy on June 20th. It just seems like you continue to get the names in the division that will help you just elevate your status inside the division. First and foremost, before we get into the fight, you have one of the best personalities in this sport, and I love the way that you go about your training, your day-to-day life. So I got to ask you, how have you been dealing with this pandemic?
Well, thank you for the compliment, first of all. Man, it's been so crazy. So, you know, Las Vegas went on lockdown, and the gym's closed, and I hit up my Muay Thai coach, like, hey, can I hit mitts with you? And so AJ Matthews, so he invited me to his garage. So I was, like, scared to leave my house, except for just going to his garage every day and hitting mitts with him. And, man, I love training with him. He really is really good at explaining body mechanics and having me work on a lot of different things to strengthen me. So I was going to his house, like, every day and training Muay Thai. And also Lorenzo Pavica, my strength and conditioning trainer, he's been having me come over to his backyard because he has this whole setup in his backyard with machines and everything, training 3 times a week instead of a normal 2 times. So I'm breaking all these personal records of mine. So also, like, one of my other teammates also hits mitts with AJ. So we're like a little quarantine group, just me and Justin and Kelly kind of training together. But, you know, I think my head coach, John, was trying to isolate himself because of people in his family were high risk, and it's just been crazy, and I've been socially shamed, like, you're not supposed to leave your house with a mask, so I never posted anything because I was getting all this hate from everybody. So, I mean, I've been training as hard as I can under the circumstances. I miss teaching my kids. I've been writing a lot. I've just been trying to, like, get stuff done that I normally wouldn't be able to. Just been worrying about the world and, you know, people dying, and I'm trying to handle my business while being, you know, sensitive to others and doing social distancing and not being able to see my best friend. So it's been like a whole huge emotional roller coaster. Hey.
but if there was one person that I was super excited to talk to, it'd be the happy warrior during these times. So trust me, we're all going through it. You know, and I personally, as someone, you know, who has the opportunity to interview fighters like yourself and cover the events and you know, not in person but from afar, you know, it's one of those things where I really personally look at you guys as a symbol of hope, a message to those, you know, who may be struggling, who may go, I don't know where my next job is, I don't know what my next step is, you know. So as much as you want to say, oh, people are getting mad at me, and, you know, I'm still getting the work I need to get done. I think it's more of a message of hope rather than a symbol of anger for those going through this pandemic. So
well, I'm really fortunate because, I mean, I just fought Macy, so, you know, I'm all right money-wise for the moment, and, like, I think most of my teammates lost their jobs because they worked for casinos and stuff, so I'm, like, you know, I feel bad for them, and, like, I don't know, I don't want to, like, you know, be like, yeah, I'm training, and you guys can't, like, I feel bad, but, I mean, then I find out everyone's their sister, her wife, so, you know, fights are being booked, right, so everyone's training somewhere, and the park, so everyone's just trying to do the best they can, I think.
Well, to credit a lot of you fighters, you know, I've heard, you know, plenty of them say, like, listen, this is our job. This is what, you know, we're paid to do. And, yes, the world is uneasy right now. But if an opportunity presents itself and there are the right, you know, safety measures in place, I'm going to go ahead and fight. So I guess I'll start there,
Yeah.
looking ahead. Are you comfortable with everything you've seen in the first few events with the UFC returning and, talking to your team and you're like, all right, I feel safe. I feel comfortable. Let's make this fight happen.
I am, and I actually did some research. Like, I messaged a bunch of friends who had gone to the event, and I was like, hey, when did you get tested? Did you get tested after the event? Were you guys isolated? Blah, blah, blah. So I asked around, and it seemed like a risk. Well, not risk. It seemed like I could do that. I was willing to do that. I'm kind of glad it didn't happen in California, because I don't know, but I'm glad that it happened how it happened, and I'm hoping that we get the Apex, because that would be awesome. It's like 20 minutes from my house.
Now, the Apex is, I know at least for this weekend, they're using the smaller cage. So as someone who likes to utilize her entire arsenal, in a fight, I'm just curious if you really pay attention to the bigger cage, the smaller cage, and maybe if you have that smaller cage, how will that come into play during fight night?
I've actually asked that before. I think, isn't the Ultimate Fighter cage smaller than the average UFC cage?
Yep.
Okay, so I'm used to that cage.
Yeah,
I've gone there a bunch of times. Then you need to experience that kind of cage. I mean, I like using the cage, and I like cornering my victims into the cage. So it'd be great.
Now, speaking of the Ultimate Fighter, you obviously also have a lot of experience, not only in a smaller cage, but in an arena with very few people. And I know, people can talk about, hey, I remember watching the Ultimate Fighter, and it's like two people, fighting, but a corner screaming their heads off, and then the other corner screaming as well. I feel like this is now a situation where, Roxanne, you're comfortable. You've been there, done that multiple times, time and time again. Have you thought about that side of it, fighting in an empty arena?
Yeah, I mean, I've had plenty of experience with that in Ultimate Fighter, and the first, when I first did it, it was eerie, because there was nobody there, but you know that everyone on TV is watching you, so it's like the cameras are on you, you know thousands of people are going to be watching, so, you kind of it's like an eerie, silent eyes watching you. I think you can hear everything your corner says, but I always hear John Wood anyway, because my ear is so attuned to his voice, so even if there's a huge audience, I can hear his voice, but I can hear the other people too. And I know now people are saying they can hear the commentators. That should be interesting. I don't know if I've had that experience before.
I was gonna say,
yeah, I'm ready for that.
In your experience, have you, whether it be on Tough or elsewhere, have you been able to hear both corners during any of your fights? I know you just said you could hear your coach. How does that change then in fight for you? Are you paying attention to what the opposite corner is saying and kind of adjusting?
Let's see. I remember we were on the ground. That I think I was fighting Macy on the ground in her corner, and I remember hearing one of them say, do this, get the arm, and I was like, no, don't get the arm, but I couldn't really do anything about it. I was fighting that anyway, so it didn't really change it, but, my mind was like, no, don't do that, so, I don't know, I feel like I'd rather not hear her corner, because I don't want to be distracted by not my coach's voice,
Absolutely, that makes total sense.
And I remember I heard, I was fighting Cesaro, the Ultimate Fighter, and it was quiet, so I could hear Mark Henry, Anaconda, and then she started winging overhands, and I was like, all right, I guess the Anaconda is the overhand. Damn it. But then I didn't understand any other code stuff except that one, so I don't know. I'd rather not hear. It kind of distracted me.
I like that. That's a different perspective. I mean, we're 9 minutes in, and I haven't yet asked the one thing that I was like, if I ever get Roxy on this podcast, I'm going to ask her. So one of the things for me in the way I try to interview is more of a human element. Like I told you off here, I work at SiriusXM. I've worked the Luke Thomas show, and he, has a specific way of interviewing when it comes to talking about fights. For me, I would like to share the stories of you fighters in a way that everyone can connect with. And it's so hard, and I do mean this sincerely, it's so hard to find someone who doesn't like you. I'm sure you can tell me to go on Instagram and social media and be like, I can find them for you. but I just love the way you approach mixed martial arts, not only as a fighter, but as a person. So the one thing I've always been curious about is, where does this come from? In an age where social media matters the most, trash talking gets you the better fights, you just put your head down and just do what you do.
Well, I got it from my mama. Yeah, my mom always taught me to be true to myself and, never be influenced by what other people say or tell me to do. So, I always try to just always be true to myself. And as a kid, I only had like a few friends. I was kind of a lonely little kid. So I've always wanted to make friends. So, like, that's why I love meeting fans so much. And when someone says, "Oh, you're the happy warrior," I'm like, "Oh my gosh, you want to talk to me?" So I'm like so happy. And I just try to be real and true and just, I'm happy when people talk to me. So maybe that's where that comes from. Did I answer your question at all?
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess my second to that would be, how do you use that now in approaching your fights? Because some people, they need a little bit. Either they need to get punched in the face during the fight, they need hard sparring sessions, or they need to engage in a back and forth trash talking with their opponents. But it just seems like you just wake up, do what you need to do, stay true to yourself, and do the job in front of you. So how do you use that personality and that mindset to get ready for your fights?
So I remember, this might even go all the way back to when I decided I wanted to fight. I was watching UFC, Aaron Riley versus Robbie Lawler, and that was like UFC 30-something. I was a teenager, and man, what a fight. They were brawling, they were hitting each other. Aaron Riley was getting hit so hard, he just kept coming forward, and then later I learned he got all this, like, dental damage and had to, like, get all this surgery, and I thought to myself, wow, that sounds horrible. If I go in there, I have to be ready to hurt, I have to be ready to die, I have to be ready to take that damage, I have to be ready to hurt my opponent. I have to decide to do that when I get in the cage. I'm training for this, I have to protect myself. That's why I'm like a big advocate for, like, refs, let us fall down, let us, don't stop the fight with someone standing. Like, I'm like kind of old school, like, be ready for that. So when I walk to the cage and I get in the cage, my mind like goes like survival, like, all right, I'm in here, this is my life, like, this is serious, I'm ready, I've accepted anything could happen in here. I always call my parents just before my fight, Mom, Dad, I love you, see you on the other side, hopefully. So my mind like switches, like, I'm no longer so happy, oh, let's fight, let's enjoy our fight. People say have fun. It's like, I'm not having fun in there. It's like Mortal Kombat. I gotta make them fall or give up. Like, that's it. So I'm like mentally like strong, like a fortress. Like, I gotta beat this person, make them give up. Not necessarily hurt them, but make them give up, like knock out or give up.
That's incredible. It's not, honestly, I wasn't expecting that. But so then that leads me to this, because we've seen a few times, and I know we talked about your experience with empty crowds, smaller cages, so on and so forth, but we've seen twice, since the UFC has returned, Dominic Cruz saying his fight got stopped too early, and then we saw Anthony Smith and people saying, his corner should have stepped in. But one thing I think that, and people talk, you mentioned the commentators also kind of somewhat having an influence to the fighters inside the cage. Don't know if that applies to the refs, but without a crowd, I think it's fair to assume that, refs have to, they're not acting on the emotion of a crowd anymore. So is that another thing that you've kind of taken into consideration? Like, listen, you've seen maybe some mistakes in these most recent events. Are you worried about the refs getting involved too late or too early?
I don't really think refs go off the emotions of the crowd. I don't believe that at all. I've talked to a bunch of refs. I've seen them practice, reffing in the gyms, like, see various scenarios. I know there are rules. For example, the way somebody falls, if they hit, signifies how aware they are. Like, if you fall straight backwards, they might be so aware. If you fall sideways and stiffen up, that means you're out. Like, there's actually all these cues. Like, it's complicated. So I really feel for them. Like, I would never want to be a ref. Also, like, if they're trying to get up or if they're intelligently defending themselves, like, you could argue that even if you're on the feet, like Ferguson, maybe he wasn't intelligently trying to block, so maybe that's why I got stopped. But I want my ref to stop my fight if I give up verbally or I tap, or if I'm unconscious. That's when I want the fight to stop. Like, let me fall to the ground, let me be out before it gets stopped. So I really like yeah, that's just my belief. So I'm not really worried because I've actually never been put in a ground and pound TKO situation. Actually, one, if you don't mind me going off on a tangent, in the Ultimate Fighter, when Jessica Rakoczy slammed me, she backed off, and ref Tyone, he was there. I stood up, but I was so dizzy I fell back down, and then she rushed in, and then he stopped the fight. And I was cool with that because he let me try to stand up, and then when I fell back down, I was like, okay. So that was cool. I didn't mind that stoppage. But, you know, if they're still moving or whatever, like, let them go. Let them continue.
I like the honesty there. I don't think a lot of fighters would admit to, like, saying, you know, hey, I got up, but I seriously wasn't all there. But I appreciate that. With that being said, going back to your most recent fight against Maycee Barber, you know, I'm sure you've been asked this 1,000 times over and over, but you truly did derail the hype train. I mean, maybe you don't see it as that, maybe you do, but I'm just curious, like, how was your confidence after that fight?
I was happy that I won. You know, I knew that I had the skills to beat her. I just had to go out and do it because you never know what can happen in a fight. I don't know. I was just happy I won, relieved, and then happy that I beat. You know, she's tough. She's knocked out. You know, she's TKO'd a lot of her opponents, like 5 in a row or something. So, I mean, I've had as many TKOs in my career as she has. It's just younger and, you know, cuter and more in the UFC. So, on a, you know, winning streak, so that maybe she was noticed more than my 5 TKOs, but that's okay. I'm not scary. I'll try.
Well, not only are you ranked and obviously coming off a huge win over Maycee Barber, but, I mean, you're right there in the flyweight division. And, you know, the matchup against Lauren Murphy can almost kind of be a breakthrough point for you if you gather a win. I mean, I know I was talking to another fighter in the flyweight division earlier this week, and they said, listen, you know, two wins, you're in a really good spot. 3 wins, there's hard to deny you a title shot. And you know, you're knocking on that doorstep. A win over Lauren Murphy would give you 2 in a row. Where do you feel you fit in at the top of this flyweight division?
Man, I'm really trying not to think past Lauren, because if I don't beat her, then all this is just talk. You know, I do believe I'm going to beat her. My teammate, JoJo, is fighting for the title, so, you know, I'm supporting her, and I want her to win, you know, against Valentina. So it's, you know, just getting complicated after that. So I'm just going to focus on Lauren and go back to the root of my motivation, which is to show the skills I've learned in training in the octagon. So that's what I'm just going to focus on now.
What excites you about this fight with Lauren Murphy? I mean, she's on a 2-fight win streak. She's looking to do the same thing all of you fighters are and stake her claim in the division. You're obviously ahead of her in the rankings. I'm not saying the rankings are everything, but they tell somewhat of a story. So what excites you about this matchup against Lauren Murphy?
I think the techniques I'm good at are going to work well against her. So, like, I think that I don't have to, like, learn any new special moves to beat her. I'll just go in there and do me and have a good fight. And she's really tough. Like, I was kind of hoping for a knockout, but I don't know if this is going to be the fight. She has such a hard head and she's really tough, but who knows? I'm just going to do my thing and see what lands. And it's going to land.
Well, this has definitely been a big joy and pleasure and honor for myself. I'm curious, you know, this fight's in June. You fought earlier this year. Depending on how everything goes, and we don't know when the world's going to return to somewhat of a normalcy, what are your plans without getting into opponents and everything? But would you like to fight again in 2020 after this one, or how do you see the rest of the year playing out?
Oh, of course I want to fight again. You know, I only have gotten to fight like twice a year for the past several years. I want to fight as much as possible. I'm like jealous of Angela Hill and Cowboy and all these people like just get in there all the time whenever they want. But whatever, you know, whoever the UFC tells me to fight, you know, I'll take it and whatever. So, yeah, send location. Hopefully it's not a scary place. And let's do it.
Oh, that's got to be, and I just said this earlier this week, I mean, maybe fighters during quarantine are coming up with great quotes. I love that. Thank you for that. Send location, maybe it's not a scary. Let's get a T-shirt made for that. Let's
Dude, I've heard several rumors of where this fight island is. I've heard it was England. I'm like, England? And then I heard it was Abu Dhabi. I was like, Abu Dhabi. And then, I don't know. I don't know. Like, I don't know if I have a preference where it is. I kind of have a preference where it's not, but.
Are you open to fighting on Fight Island?
Dude, Dana White should just start, like, sending out, like, red herrings everywhere. Guess what? It's in Brazil. Guess what? It's near Hawaii. Guess what? Like, just to have, like, so many rumors floating around that nobody knows what it is. Otherwise, the one rumor, if there's one, everyone will think it's real, you know?
Right. Exactly. And he should, like, I thought it was very, very, I don't want to say intimidating, but I thought it was very interesting of Dana White saying these fighters are going to get on a plane. They have no idea where they're going, but they'll get there when they get there. And they'll find out where they're at once they're there. I was like, what is he building?
Did you see that? Oh, I didn't hear him say that.
Yeah, when he first started talking about Fight Island, that was one thing he said, I think, to Brett Okamoto of ESPN. Right. Like, they're getting on a plane and they have no idea where they're going.
It's my job. I guess. Well, get on the plane, young lady. Okay.
Roxanne,
do I need snacks?
Do I need snacks? That's amazing. Before I let you go, and you know, again, I can speak all day about your character and how you go about, you know, your career. I'm just curious, when this is all said and done, you know, and I don't think it's coming to an end anytime soon, but when people look back on your fighting career, what would you like your legacy to be?
Let's see, I had a good answer for this. What was it? I want people, okay, I like to think of myself as a master of hard work. Like, I'm not physically talented. I'm not the best at any one thing, but I work so hard, and I just keep working as hard as I can, and I put in 100% effort. So I want people to be inspired by that effort. Not necessarily like, don't give up sort of thing, because sometimes you need to move on from certain things, but just like friggin' hard work can get you places and get you positive results. And I want anybody from any walk of life, you know, any mentality to know if you just work hard, you can get most things in life. That's kind of what I want.
Well, I think you're well on your way in that regard, Roxanne Modafferi. Best of luck, not that you need luck, in your fight against Lauren Murphy.
I'll take the luck. I'll take all the luck. Luck is a part of our game.
I've learned to be careful with who I say that to. Some fighters go off on a tangent when I wish them the best of luck. But Roxanne Modafferi, thank you so much. Like I said earlier, this is one interview I was very much looking forward to, and I'm happy to have you on. And hopefully we can talk again after your fight.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
That was Roxanne Modafferi, ladies and gentlemen. Great interview. Another great quote. Send location. Hope it's not a scary place. We're having a great time here on Inside the Cage on BJPenn.com, the BJPenn.com YouTube page. Make sure to subscribe, share, like, comment, rate, all of those things you do on YouTube. Make sure to follow BJPenn.com on Twitter at BJPenn.dotcom, and follow myself on Twitter at MP2310 and on Instagram at MikeP2310. Until next time, you know the drill. As always, we will see you soon, everybody. This has been another edition of Inside the Cage.